Deep in the rugged hills of eastern Oklahoma, a single slab of sandstone stands 12 feet tall, a silent monument to a history that's not supposed to exist. Carved into its weathered face are 8 strange symbols, an alphabet that had vanished from the earth 1,000 years ago. For generations, local tribes spoke of the Indian rock writing, a message left by ancient people. But when those symbols were finally translated, they didn't tell a Native American story. They spelled out a name, Genoidl, and the type of script used, a specific form of ancient Norse runes, pointed to an impossible date of origin, somewhere between 600 and 900 AD. That's at least 5 centuries before Columbus ever set sail. And this wasn't found in Newfoundland, where we know Vikings briefly landed. This was found 1,000 miles inland, in the landlocked heart of the American continent. This single stone poses the most terrifying question you can ask of history. What if the entire story of America's discovery is wrong? What if a band of Norse explorers penetrated deeper into this continent than anyone has ever dared to imagine, leaving behind a cryptic message that completely redraws the map of the past? Mainstream archaeology has a simple answer. It's a fake, a modern hoax carved by a local eccentric. But as we peel back the layers of this mystery, you'll find that the simple answer might be the least likely one of all. The real question isn't just who carved this stone. It's how far would the establishment go to protect the history we've all been taught? To understand the sheer improbability of this artifact, you have to understand where it was found. This isn't the coast of New England or the shores of the Great Lakes. This is Heavener, Oklahoma, a small town nestled in the Ouachita Mountains, a region of dense forests, steep ravines, and winding rivers. It's a place that feels ancient and isolated even today. In the 19th century, it was the frontier, the very edge of the known world for American settlers. But long before that, it was Choctaw Nation territory. And the Choctaw people knew about the stone. They had always known. To them, it was just a landmark, a strange rock with markings in a deep, shaded hollow now known as Heavener Runestone Park. They had no tradition of carving it themselves. Their oral history simply said it had always been there. The first documented report from a non-native came in the 1830s, when a Choctaw hunting party led a white trapper to the site. He saw the bizarre symbols but had no idea what to make of them. For nearly a century after that, the stone remained a local curiosity, a place for teenagers to hang out, a piece of local color mentioned in passing. Ranchers and hunters in the area knew of it, but no one understood its significance. It was a message in a bottle, written in a language nobody present could read. The bottle had washed ashore in one of the most unlikely places on Earth, and it sat unopened, waiting for someone to finally recognize the script. That person was a young girl named Gloria Farley. In November of 1928, her father took her to see the strange rock her friends had been talking about. She was just a kid, but she was immediately captivated. The symbols felt alien, ancient, and important. She felt in her bones that this was not a random carving. It was a deliberate message from a forgotten time. That childhood fascination sparked a lifelong obsession. Gloria Farley would dedicate the next 60 years of her life to a single, consuming quest, proving to a skeptical world that the stone in her backyard was a genuine relic of a pre-Columbian Viking expedition into the American heartland. Her quest began as a lonely one. In the 1930s and 40s, the academic world had no time for such theories. The story of America was settled. It began in 1492 with 3 ships, and any evidence to the contrary was treated not with curiosity, but with contempt. The idea of Norsemen rowing up the Mississippi, the Arkansas, and finally the Poteau River into the mountains of Oklahoma was considered pure fantasy. It was the stuff of pulp novels, not serious archaeology. When Farley began writing letters to universities and museums, she was met with polite dismissals or outright ridicule. The experts told her it was likely carved by a Swedish immigrant in the 19th century, a member of the Scandinavian settlers who moved into the Midwest. Or perhaps it was a prank by local kids. Anything was more plausible than Vikings. But Gloria was stubborn. She was a researcher, not a fantasist. She spent thousands of hours in libraries, teaching herself everything she could about Norse history, language, and runes. She meticulously documented the stone, taking rubbings and photographs, noting its precise location, the geology of the area, and the local history. She knew the skeptics were wrong. For one, the weathering on the inscriptions was deep and ancient. You could see the lichen and erosion patterns were consistent with centuries of exposure, not a few decades. You couldn't fake that kind of age. And then there was the problem of the runes themselves. The letters on the Heavener stone belonged to a runic alphabet called the Elder Futhark. This is critical. The Elder Futhark was used by Germanic and Norse tribes primarily from the 2nd to the 8th centuries. By the time of the famous Viking Age, the era of Leif Erikson's voyages to North America around 1000 AD, this alphabet was already obsolete. They were using a newer, more streamlined script called the Younger Futhark. So, if this was a hoax carved by a 19th century Swedish immigrant, they would have had to be an incredibly niche historical linguist. They would have needed knowledge that was, at the time, obscure even within university departments. Why would a farmer or a railroad worker in rural Oklahoma have this highly specialized, academic knowledge of a defunct alphabet? And why would they trek into a remote ravine to carve a meaningless name, only to tell no one and take no credit for their masterful prank? It didn't add up. The name itself, Nomiedel, was another puzzle. Some linguists suggested it was a compound of Nome and Dal, meaning Gnome's Valley or Sun Valley. Others argued it was a personal name, perhaps G. Nomedal. The name Nomedal still exists in Norway today, but the first letter, the G, was actually a combination of two runes, G and L. This led to another interpretation, Glomedal, Glom's Valley, or maybe it wasn't a name at all but a boundary marker, a claim, a declaration that we were here. For decades, Gloria Farley fought this battle almost entirely on her own. She was an amateur historian from Oklahoma going up against the entire weight of institutional science. She documented other strange carvings in the area, potential mooring stones along the rivers, and other anomalies that hinted at a wider, hidden history. She was dismissed as a crank, a purveyor of fringe history. The stone was a local legend, and that's all the world wanted it to be. The official story of America was clean, simple, and it started with Columbus. An ancient Norse stone in Oklahoma didn't just add a new chapter, it threatened to burn the whole book. Gloria Farley believed the truth was etched in that rock, and she refused to let it be erased by ridicule. She kept searching, kept writing, and kept waiting for anyone to finally take her seriously. She had no idea that a discovery thousands of miles away, in the archives of a Scandinavian university, was about to give her the ammunition she had been waiting for her entire life. A single forgotten document that would connect her Oklahoma stone to the wider world of Viking exploration and turn this local mystery into an international debate. That document began its life not in an ancient Viking longship, but in the meticulous files of the United States Army. And the man who wrote it wasn't an archaeologist or a historian. He was a professional codebreaker. His name was Alf Monge. Gloria Farley had spent years hitting brick walls. She had written to university professors across the country, sent her rubbings to Scandinavian historical societies, and pleaded with local officials. The response was almost always the same: a polite dismissal. The stone was a local curiosity, they'd say. Probably a prank by early settlers of German or Scandinavian descent. There was no context, no other evidence, no reason to believe it was authentic. For every person who believed, there were 100 who scoffed. Gloria was losing hope, her quest to legitimize the stone turning into a lonely, thankless crusade. Then, in the late 1950s, she stumbled upon a name: Alf Monge, a retired U.S. Army cryptanalyst. This wasn't a man who studied dusty artifacts. He was a man who had spent World War II staring at impenetrable strings of enemy code, searching for the hidden logic, the secret key that would unlock their meaning. After the war, he had turned his formidable intellect to a new, peculiar hobby: ancient puzzles. He became fascinated with historical ciphers, from medieval manuscripts to, fatefully, Norse runestones. Gloria saw a glimmer of hope. Here was a man who wouldn't just look at the symbols on her stone and compare them to a textbook. He would look for a system, a hidden intelligence. It was a long shot, but she had nothing to lose. She gathered her best photographs, her most detailed charcoal rubbings of the inscription, and mailed them off to Monge, along with a letter pouring out her decades of passion and frustration. Then she waited. When the reply came, it wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a simple confirmation or denial. It was a bombshell. Monge told her that nearly everyone, from the local townsfolk to the world's most esteemed runologists, was looking at the Heavener stone all wrong. They were trying to read it like a sentence. They were looking for a name, a message, a declaration. But Monge, with his codebreaker's eye, saw something else entirely. He believed it wasn't a message at all. It was a puzzle, a cryptogram. Specifically, he declared, the Heavener Runestone was a date stone. According to Monge, ancient Norse explorers, particularly a select group of them, had a secret method of marking dates. It was a complex system, a kind of runic Sudoku that embedded a specific day, month, and year into a short string of characters. It was a way to create a permanent record, a timestamp of their presence, but in a way that only the initiated could understand. It was, in his view, a secret language hidden in plain sight. He laid out his analysis for Gloria. The 8 runes on the stone were not a jumbled name. They were a set of variables in a formula. He argued that certain runes had no numerical values in the Norse system. Others, he theorized, acted as indicators or multipliers, pointing to specific positions on a perpetual calendar, like the Old Norse runic calendar. He cross-referenced the symbols, applied his cryptographic formulas, and performed a series of calculations that would make a mathematician's head spin. And out of this complex web of symbols and numbers, he extracted a single breathtakingly specific date. November 11th, 1012. Let that sink in. Not the 11th century. Not around the year 1000, but a precise day. November 11th, 1012. A full 480 years before Columbus set sail. This was the ammunition Gloria had been dreaming of. It was concrete. It was specific. It transformed the stone from a vague curiosity into a historical document with a timestamp. The date itself was significant. November 11th is the feast day of Saint Martin of Tours, a major holiday in the medieval Christian world, which the Vikings of the 11th century were increasingly a part of. For Gloria, it was a moment of pure vindication. The stone wasn't a fraud. It wasn't a meaningless carving. It was an incredibly sophisticated marker left by Christianized Norsemen, a testament to their journey deep into the American heartland. The location on Poteau Mountain suddenly made more sense. It wasn't a settlement. It was a landmark, a high point from which to survey the territory, a place to leave a permanent, indelible record of their achievement, dated for all posterity, or at least for those who knew the code. But Alf Monge's letter contained something even more profound, the final piece of the puzzle that elevated the Heavener stone from a local wonder to a piece of a much grander, continent-spanning mystery. Monge told Gloria that her stone was not unique. He had been studying other controversial runestones found across North America, stones that had been dismissed by academics for decades. The most famous of these was the Kensington Runestone, a massive slab unearthed in Minnesota in 1898, which told a detailed story of Norse explorers being killed by natives. It was widely considered a hoax. There were also the Spirit Pond stones, found in Maine in the 1970s, which contained maps and lengthy inscriptions. Mainstream scholars looked at these stones and saw different handwriting, different dialects, different stories, all pointing to them being unrelated modern forgeries. But Monge the codebreaker saw the opposite. He ignored the surface-level messages. He looked deeper at the underlying structure. And in all of them, Kensington, Spirit Pond, and now Heavener, he found the exact same system. The same hidden dating method. The same cryptographic signature. He claimed that the Kensington stone was dated 1362. The Spirit Pond stones contained the date 1401. And the Heavener stone was dated 1012. They weren't random fakes created by different people in different centuries. According to Monge, they were all authentic. They were all part of the same tradition of secret, coded runic cartography and record-keeping, spanning over 400 years of exploration. This was the connection Gloria needed. Her strange stone in the Oklahoma hills was no longer an outlier. It was now potentially the oldest link in a chain of evidence suggesting a prolonged, organized, and secret Norse presence in America that lasted for centuries. It implied that different expeditions, separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles, were all using the same complex cryptographic system to mark their presence. This was a paradigm-shifting theory. It recontextualized everything, but it also painted a giant target on Gloria Farley, Alf Monge, and anyone who dared to support them. Because in the hallowed halls of academia, among the world's leading experts in Norse language and history, this idea wasn't just controversial. It was heresy, and they were about to unleash a storm of academic fury that would threaten to bury the Heavener Runestone and its defenders once and for all. The first thunderclap of that storm came from Oslo, Norway. It came in the form of a man named Aslak Listel. Now, if you were a runologist in the mid-20th century, Aslak Listel was the final boss. He was the head of the runic archives at the University of Oslo, a gatekeeper of Norse history, and a man whose opinion could make or break an entire archaeological discovery. When Gloria Farley's letters and rubbings of the Heavener stone finally landed on his desk, his reaction was swift, decisive, and utterly devastating. He and other leading experts like Eric Wahlgren at UCLA didn't just disagree, they dismissed it entirely. To them, the Heavener Runestone wasn't a mystery. It was a joke, a poorly executed one at that. Their argument was built on a foundation of cold, hard linguistic science, and their first target was the runes themselves. You see, the Norse didn't use just one runic alphabet. Their writing system evolved over centuries, much like our own alphabet has. The earliest form, used from around 150 to 800 AD, is called the Elder Futhark. It's complex with 24 characters, but as the Viking Age kicked into high gear around 800 AD, a streamlined, more efficient version emerged, called the Younger Futhark, with only 16 characters. This was the alphabet of the great Viking explorers, the one used to carve sagas of conquest from England to Russia. The problem with the Heavener inscription was that it was a mess. It was a chaotic mix and match of these two distinct alphabets, separated by hundreds of years of linguistic evolution. The inscription used a G rune and an L rune straight out of the old, pre-Viking Elder Futhark. But the other letters? They looked like they belonged to the much later Younger Futhark. To a runic expert like Listel, this was like finding a Roman-era tablet inscribed with a sentence that was half Latin and half modern Italian. It was an impossible contradiction. No single Viking carver at any point in history would have written like that. It was the runic equivalent of a ransom note cut from different magazines. This dating paradox was a killer blow. If you dated the stone based on the older Elder Futhark runes, it would have to be from before 800 AD. This was long before Leif Erikson, before the great Viking longships were even a dominant force in the North Atlantic. The idea of pre-Viking Scandinavians penetrating all the way to the landlocked heart of North America was, to the academic world, pure fantasy. But if you dated it to the later Viking Age, based on the other runes, then the carver inexplicably used ancient, obsolete letters that hadn't been in common use for centuries. Either way, the timeline made no sense. It was a historical impossibility. Then there was the translation itself. No Meadle. Valley of the Gnomes. This, more than anything, made the academics scoff. The word gnome as we know it, a little bearded man in a pointy hat, is a relatively modern concept, popularized by a 16th century Swiss alchemist named Paracelsus. The idea that a 10th century Viking would carve this on a rock in Oklahoma seemed utterly absurd. It sounded less like a historical record and more like a prop from a Tolkien novel. The defenders of the stone argued that the root of the word could mean earth dweller, a fitting name for miners or farmers. But the damage was done. The Gnome Valley translation was an easy point of ridicule, a label that made the whole affair seem childish and amateurish. The official academic verdict began to solidify. The Heavener Runestone, they concluded, was a modern creation. It was most likely carved in the 19th or early 20th century, probably by a Scandinavian immigrant to the area. There was a well-documented Romantic runic revival during that period, where settlers, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the old country, would carve runes on rocks or fence posts. These carvings were often sentimental, and almost always riddled with errors, mixing up different alphabets and time periods, exactly like the Heavener stone. This explanation was neat, tidy, and required no leaps of faith about transoceanic voyages. It explained the mixed-up runes, the weird translation, and the impossible location. For the academic world, the case was closed. The stone was a fake. Gloria Farley and her small band of believers were crushed, but not defeated. They were amateurs, yes. They were outsiders. But they were on the ground. They could see the stone, touch it, feel its immense age. They saw how the lichen grew deep within the carvings, a process that takes centuries. They argued that the experts in their ivory towers were too rigid. They accused them of having a doctrine of disbelief, a refusal to even consider evidence that challenged their established timelines. Farley argued that a Viking, isolated deep in a foreign land, might not carve with the textbook precision of a scholar in Oslo. He would carve from memory, perhaps mixing the runes he learned as a child with the ones his father taught him. It wouldn't be perfect. It would be human. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. For decades, the Heavener Runestone was little more than a local curiosity, dismissed by mainstream history and relegated to the fringe world of pseudo-archaeology. The stone sat on Poteau Mountain, a monument to a forgotten argument, its defenders growing older, their voices fading. It seemed the storm of academic fury had won. The experts had successfully buried the stone under a mountain of irrefutable, logical, and damning evidence. But then a new voice entered the debate. And he didn't come from a university history department. He came from the world of engineering. His name was Richard Nielsen, a Danish-American engineer from Houston. Nielsen wasn't a runologist, but he was a brilliant puzzle solver, a man who looked at systems and patterns. And when he looked at the Heavener inscription, he didn't see a random, jumbled mess. He saw a code. He believed the academics had made a fundamental error. They were trying to read the runes as simple letters spelling out a word. But what if that wasn't their primary purpose at all? What if the carver wasn't trying to write a sentence? What if he was trying to write a date? Nielsen began to cross-reference the runic shapes not just with alphabets, but with obscure Norse calendrical systems, symbols used to mark seasons and holidays. He was looking for a pattern everyone else had missed. The academics had analyzed the language of the stone. Nielsen decided to analyze the math. And in doing so, he stumbled upon a potential solution so elegant and so shocking, it threatened to turn the entire field of runology on its head. The experts thought the runes were the fatal flaw of the Heavener stone. Richard Nielsen was about to argue that they were, in fact, the key to everything. Richard Nielsen wasn't a professor of runology. He wasn't an archaeologist with a university grant. He was a petroleum engineer from Houston, Texas. But what he was a polymath. A man with a relentless, consuming curiosity for history, languages, and codes. And when he looked at the Heavener Runestone, he didn't see a clumsy forgery. He saw a complex cipher. A message written in a dialect that the modern world had simply forgotten how to read. The academic world had built its case for dismissal on a few key points. First, the inscription was a mess. It looked like a mix of runes from the Elder Futhark, the ancient alphabet used until about 800 AD, and the Younger Futhark, which replaced it during the Viking Age. To a runologist, this was like finding a sentence written with half its letters in Old English script and the other half in modern text message abbreviations. It screamed amateur. It screamed fake. The second rune looked like a capital A letter that doesn't exist in that form in Futhark. The seventh rune looked like a bizarre, inverted trident, a symbol with no known meaning. It was, to the experts, linguistic gibberish. But Nielsen started with a different premise. What if the carver wasn't an idiot? What if the carver was actually incredibly clever? He asked a question nobody else had bothered to ask. What if these aren't just single letters? This led him to the world of bind runes. A bind rune is exactly what it sounds like. Two or more runes bound together into a single character. It was a kind of runic shorthand, a way to save space or to add a mystical, layered meaning to an inscription. Think of it like a modern logo, where the letters of a company's name are artistically combined into one symbol. It's not that the designer doesn't know how to spell. It's that they're creating something more compact and potent. The Vikings did this all the time. But scholars looking at the Heavener stone had somehow overlooked it. Nielsen took out a pencil and began to deconstruct the inscription, not as 8 individual letters, but as a series of potential puzzles. He started with the first rune, which everyone agreed was the letter G, simple enough. But then he looked at that second rune, the one that looked like an A and had been a major point of contention. The experts said it was anachronistic, a fatal flaw. Nielsen saw something else. He saw the rune for L, which looks like an inverted V, and the rune for G, a simple X superimposed on top of each other. G and L fused together. Not an A. A bind rune. Suddenly, the inscription wasn't GA. It was GLG. Or maybe GGL. The order was still a question, but the possibilities exploded. He moved down the line. The third rune was an O. The fourth an M. The fifth an E. So far, he had something like Guldo-ME. Still not a clear word. He kept going. The sixth rune looked like a D. But the seventh was that weird, inverted trident that had stumped everyone. It wasn't in any runic alphabet. It was pure fantasy, the final nail in the coffin for the stone's authenticity. But Nielsen, now thinking in terms of combinations, saw it differently. He saw the rune for A, which looks like an F with the arms pointing up, and the rune for L, that inverted V stacked right on top of it. A and L bound together. Another bind rune. Suddenly, the nonsensical scrawl of nometal began to transform. By carefully unbinding the fused letters, Nielsen revealed a new transcription. The first character was a G, the second a bind rune of L and O, the third an M, the fourth a bind rune of E and D, the fifth an A, the sixth an L. The inscription didn't say nometal. It said glometal, glometal, or more likely, splitting it into two words as was common. Glomdal. Dal is the Old Norse word for valley, and Glom? It's a name, a proper Norse name. The inscription wasn't a random string of letters. It wasn't a magic word. It was a claim. It was a property marker. It said simply, Glom's Valley. This was a bombshell. In a single stroke of lateral thinking, Nielsen had turned the biggest argument against the stone, its clumsy, mixed-up letters, into the most compelling evidence for its authenticity. A forger, especially one in the 1800s or early 1900s, would likely copy runes straight from a book. They would make them neat and tidy. They wouldn't invent complex, interwoven bind runes that required a deep, almost intuitive understanding of runic traditions to decipher. This wasn't the work of a prankster. This felt like the work of a Viking. But what about the date? The last two runes on the stone were the ones that Gloria Farley and the others believed represented a date. November 11, 1012. This was based on a theory by a man named Alf Monge, who believed Vikings used complex ciphers tied to the church calendar. The academic world had torn this theory to shreds. They argued, correctly, that the runes used didn't match the known runic calendar systems for representing those numbers. The symbol for 11 was wrong, and the symbol for 1012 was even more wrong. It was another sign of a hoax. Nielsen agreed with the critics on one point. Monge's date theory was wrong. The runes didn't fit that system. But just as with the letters, Nielsen didn't assume the carver had made a mistake. He assumed the translators had. We were trying to read a Viking message using the wrong dictionary and the wrong calendar. We were trying to force a pre-Columbian Norse artifact to conform to a medieval Christian dating system that its carver may have never even heard of. Nielsen began to dig into the obscure world of Norse timekeeping, not the later Christian calendar sticks, but the older pagan ways of marking time. And he found something fascinating. Before the widespread adoption of the 19-year golden number cycle for calculating dates, some Scandinavians used a much simpler system. It was a pentamal system, meaning it was based on the number 5. We see remnants of it today in how we count. We make 4 vertical slashes and a 5th one across them. It's ancient and intuitive. Nielsen discovered that in this old system, a single vertical line could represent the number 1. A V-shape could represent 5. An X-shape or 2 V's joined at the point could represent 10. What if the carver wasn't trying to write the number 11 for a day and 11 for a month? What if those last 2 runes weren't 2 separate numbers at all? He looked again at the stone. The final 2 characters. One looked like 2 vertical lines. The other looked like a cross and X. The established theory tried to shoehorn these into a day and a month. It didn't work. But Nielsen, using this older, simpler, and arguably more authentic Norse counting method, saw something else entirely. 2 vertical lines, the number 2. An X, the number 10. This didn't look like a day and a month. It looked like a year. But what year? The number 10 and the number 2. Could it be 10-2? 1002? That seemed too simple. And what about the other numbers in the date everyone believed was there, the 1012? The number 1 and the number 1? They were missing. This is where Nielsen made his final breathtaking leap of logic. He theorized that the carver wasn't just writing a number. He was indicating a position within a cycle. The runic calendar was often tied to the day of the week and the phase of the sun. The carver wasn't just saying the year is X. He was providing coordinates on a calendar wheel, a specific point in time that could be calculated if you knew the system. Nielsen believed the so-called date runes weren't a date at all in the way we think of it. They were a key that pointed to one specific year in a very specific decade of the Viking Age. He was proposing that the Heavener carver had used a form of runic calculation so obscure that it had been almost completely lost to history. a system that only someone living in that specific transitional period of Norse culture would have known. And if he could prove how that system worked, if he could turn that key, he wouldn't just suggest a possible date for the stone. He could pinpoint the exact year it was carved. And that year was not 1012. It was a date far more significant, a date that would tie the lonely stone in Oklahoma directly into the most famous Viking voyages ever recorded. Henrik Williams, the world's foremost expert on runic writing, looked at the evidence, at the shapes and the lines of the Oklahoma inscription, and he delivered his verdict. The date wasn't 1012. It wasn't even close. The runes carved into that rock, he argued, belonged to a much later period of Scandinavian history. They were what's known as medieval runes, a style used roughly between the years 1100 and 1500. This wasn't a message from the height of the Viking Age. This was a message from its long, dramatic twilight. Now, to a casual observer, this might sound like a minor detail, just academic nitpicking over a few centuries. But in the context of American history, the difference between 1012 and, say, 1312 is the difference between a plausible story and an impossible one. The year 1012 fit perfectly with the sagas. It was the era of Leif Erikson and his brothers, the time of the Vinland voyages, the one and only period when we know Vikings were in North America. Pushing the date forward by 200 or 300 years shatters that neat little picture entirely. Leif Erikson was long dead. The Viking age of raiding and conquest was over. Scandinavia had converted to Christianity. The world had changed. So if the Heavener Runestone wasn't carved by Leif Erikson's crew, then who on earth carved it? This is where the story gets truly fascinating. Because while the Great Viking Age had ended in Europe, it hadn't ended everywhere. On the very edge of the world, on a giant, forbidding island of ice and rock, a forgotten colony of Norsemen was still holding on. Greenland. We tend to forget about the Greenland colony. We think of the Vikings in America as a brief, failed experiment. They came, they saw, they built a few huts at Lansieux Meadows in Newfoundland, and then they left. But the Greenland settlement, founded by Eric the Red around the year 985, wasn't a temporary camp. It was a permanent, thriving European society that lasted for nearly 500 years. At its peak, it had a population of several thousand people, with 2 major settlements, dozens of farms, a cathedral, and its own bishop. These weren't pagan raiders. These were Christian farmers, hunters, and merchants, living a brutal, isolated existence, but an existence that was undeniably Norse. And here's the crucial part. From their home in Greenland, North America was just next door. The sagas call it Markland, the land of forests, and Vinland, the land of wine. To the Greenlanders, this wasn't some mythical faraway place. It was a tangible resource. Their own island had almost no trees, so they needed the timber from Markland, likely the coast of modern-day Labrador, to build their ships and homes. Archaeological evidence confirms this. Wood found in the Greenland settlements has been identified as North American in origin. This means they weren't just visiting once. They were making repeated, regular trips across the Davis Strait for centuries. So, the new timeline proposed by the runes suddenly makes a different kind of sense. The carver of the Heavener stone wasn't some lost explorer from the original Vinland expedition. He was much more likely a Greenlander, a man from a later generation, for whom sailing to the New World was a known, if dangerous, reality. Perhaps he was on a lumber expedition that got blown off course. Perhaps he was part of a hunting party searching for walrus ivory and furs. Or perhaps he was an exile, banished from the Greenland colony for a crime, and forced to sail west into the unknown. But this raises an even bigger question. It's one thing to imagine a Greenlander landing on the coast of Canada. It's another thing entirely to place him in the landlocked subtropical hills of Oklahoma, more than 2,000 miles from the North Atlantic. How could he possibly have gotten there? The skeptics had always pointed to the geography as proof of a hoax, but the proponents of the stone have an answer that turns the map of America into a Viking highway. They point to the rivers. Look at a map of the central United States. It's dominated by one massive, sprawling river system, the Mississippi. And feeding into the Mississippi is the Arkansas River. And feeding into the Arkansas River, right near the border of Oklahoma and Arkansas, is the Poteau River. And the Heavener Runestone sits on a hill overlooking that very river. The theory is as simple as it is audacious. A Norse ship, perhaps a smaller, more maneuverable vessel called a nar, didn't just land on the coast. It sailed into the Gulf of Mexico, found the mouth of the Mississippi, and began an epic journey upstream, deep into the heart of an unknown continent. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. A small crew of Norsemen paddling and sailing against the current, through the swamps of Louisiana, past the bluffs of Mississippi, deeper and deeper into a land teeming with civilizations and dangers they couldn't possibly comprehend. For weeks, for months, they would have traveled, their world shrinking to the wooden ship beneath their feet and the endless, winding river ahead. They would have been the first Europeans to see this land, the first to hear its sounds and smell its air. And when they finally reached the Poteau River and could go no further, they climbed a hill, and one of them, a man named Glom, carved his name into a giant slab of sandstone. A lonely marker, a final declaration of existence at the end of the world. It's an incredible story, a journey that would rival the most famous epics of exploration. But for a long time it was just that, a story supported by a single controversial stone. An anomaly is easy to dismiss. A single data point can be a fluke, a fraud, or a mistake. To build a case for a lost chapter of history, you need more than one piece of evidence. You need a pattern. And then they found one. Over 1,000 miles to the north, in the rural farmland of Minnesota, another stone was unearthed. It was discovered in 1898 by a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman, tangled in the roots of an aspen tree. It was a flat slab of gray wax stone about 200 pounds, and it was covered on its face and side with neatly carved runes. But this wasn't just a name or a claim. This was a message, a full-blown story. The inscription, when translated, tells a chilling tale of a journey gone horribly wrong. It speaks of a group of 8 Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland through the west. It describes how the party made camp by a lake, went fishing, and returned to find 10 of their men, red with blood and dead. The stone ends with a plea to the Virgin Mary to save us from evil, and gives a specific date, the year 1362. This was the Kensington Runestone, and it changed everything. Here was another inscription, found deep in the American interior, far from the coast. And crucially, the runes used on the Kensington stone were the same type of later, medieval runes that experts like Henrik Williams saw on the Heavener stone. The date, 1362, placed it squarely in the era of the Greenland colony. Suddenly, the lonely stone in Oklahoma wasn't so lonely anymore. It was part of a potential pattern. 2 stones separated by 1,000 miles and perhaps a century or two, but telling a similar unbelievable story. That Norse explorers, likely from Greenland, didn't just cling to the Atlantic coast. They penetrated the continent. They traveled the great river systems. They were here in the heartland of America, centuries before Columbus, living, exploring, and dying. It was a breathtaking theory, a lost age of Viking exploration, a secret history hidden in plain sight. The 2 stones seemed to corroborate each other, painting a picture of a far more extensive and long-lived Norse presence in the Americas than anyone had ever dared to imagine. But as scholars and scientists began to scrutinize these artifacts with modern tools and a healthy dose of skepticism, they found something that didn't fit. A detail so small yet so damning, it threatened to bring the entire incredible story crashing down. That detail was language. Not the story the runes told, but the very way they were written. The first and most famous artifact to fall under this new, intense microscope was the Kensington Runestone. For decades, it had been the crown jewel of the Viking in America theory. A 200-pound slab of gray wax sandstone, supposedly unearthed by a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman in Minnesota in 1898, wrapped in the roots of an aspen tree. It told a harrowing story of Swedes and Norwegians on an exploration journey, a tale of a massacre, and a plea for help, dated 1362. It was perfect, almost too perfect. When linguists and rhinologists, experts in ancient Germanic scripts, took a serious look, they didn't see a 14th century diary entry. They saw a 19th century puzzle. The problem is that runes, like any form of writing, evolved over time. The alphabet a Viking would have used in the 10th century was different from the one used in the 12th, which was different again from the one used in the 14th. The Kensington inscription was a bizarre cocktail of runes from different eras, some of which had fallen out of use hundreds of years before 1362, and others that were later inventions. It was like reading a letter supposedly from George Washington that used words like groovy and selfie. The grammar was wonky, the spelling inconsistent with 14th century Scandinavian dialects. One of the most glaring red flags was the use of Arabic numerals, which were carved right into the stone for the date 1362. While Arabic numerals had begun to appear in Europe by then, their use was extremely rare among Scandinavian explorers and carvers of the time. They were the domain of merchants and mathematicians, not sailors carving a memorial on a rock in the middle of a hostile continent. The inscription used a specific runic symbol for the number 1, that was a 19th century invention, found in books on runes popular in the late 1800s, books that a curious Swedish immigrant in Minnesota might just have access to. It was a linguistic Frankenstein's monster, stitched together from parts that should never have shared the same body. The message wasn't just unlikely. To the trained eye, it was impossible. It read less like a genuine medieval artifact and more like something created by someone with a rudimentary, book-based knowledge of runes, someone trying to imitate what they thought an ancient carving should look like. But the case against Kensington wasn't just about language. The stone itself began to talk. Geologists were called in to examine the physical evidence. An inscription exposed to the harsh Minnesota winters for over 500 years should show significant weathering. The sharp edges of the carvings should be softened, the grooves filled with microscopic mineral deposits, the surface pitted and worn by centuries of freezing and thawing. When they put the Kensington runes under the microscope, they saw something startling. The carvings were crisp, the grooves were sharp, fresh. A geologist named Newton Winchell, one of the first to examine it, noted that the inscription appeared to be much more recent than the glacial scratches that covered the rest of the stone's surface. In the 1980s and 90s, more advanced analysis confirmed these early suspicions. Studies of the stone's surface weathering, specifically the breakdown of mica and hornblende minerals within the carved grooves compared to the uncarved face, suggested an age of decades, not centuries. The stone itself, the very tablet upon which this epic story was written, became the star witness against its own story. It hadn't been sitting under a tree for 500 years. It had likely been carved not long before Olaf Omen discovered it. And then there was Olaf Omen himself, the humble farmer who stumbled upon this piece of history. As investigators dug into his life, the story grew more complicated. Omen was not an uneducated man. He was known to be intensely interested in his Swedish heritage, and in his personal effects after his death, a crucial clue was found. A copy of a popular Swedish-American encyclopedia, an almanac from 1891. This book contained a section on runes, including a runic alphabet. And wouldn't you know it, the alphabet in that book contained the same bizarre mix of new and old runes, the same errors and anachronisms, found on the Kensington stone. It was a smoking gun. The picture that emerged wasn't necessarily of a malicious con man trying to fool the world. It was perhaps something more human. A story of a Scandinavian immigrant community in the American Midwest, feeling culturally isolated, wanting to plant their flag, to prove they weren't newcomers but were, in fact, the original pioneers. Was it a prank that spiraled out of control? A personal project Omen created out of intellectual curiosity that was mistaken for the real thing? We may never know his true motive, but the evidence was overwhelming. The Kensington Runestone, once the strongest pillar supporting the Viking theory, was almost certainly a modern creation. A hoax. The debunking of the Kensington stone sent a shockwave through the world of amateur and professional archaeology. It was a cautionary tale. It proved that wishful thinking and local pride could easily cloud judgment, and it established a new rigorous standard. From now on, any runestone found on American soil would be met with a wall of skepticism. It wouldn't be enough for it to look old. It wouldn't be enough for it to have a good story. It would have to withstand the same brutal trifecta of scrutiny that brought down the Kensington stone: linguistic analysis, geological testing, and a thorough investigation of its discovery context. This is the shadow that loomed over Gloria Farley and her beloved Heavener Runestone. As the Kensington story unraveled in the public eye, the Oklahoma stone, once a quirky local legend, was suddenly thrust into a much harsher light. If the most famous and well-documented runestone in America was a fake, what did that mean for this strange, isolated carving in the hills of Poteau Mountain? The skeptics turned their eyes southward. They saw the same pattern. An inscription found in an unlikely place, championed by passionate locals, with a story that seemed too good to be true. They had their playbook, sharpened on the fields of Minnesota, and now they were ready to run the same plays in Oklahoma. They would start with the runes themselves. Just like with Kensington, the very letters carved into the Heavener stone would be the first to go on trial. And what they would find was a puzzle just as deep, and in some ways even more perplexing. The question was no longer just, could Vikings have come to Oklahoma? The question now became, even if they could, is this what they would have written? The ghost of the Kensington hoax was long, and it threatened to swallow the Heavener Runestone whole. And so, the stone was put on trial. Not in a court of law, but in the unforgiving court of academic opinion. The jury was comprised of the world's foremost experts in Scandinavian languages and runic alphabets, and the evidence was a mere 8 characters carved into sandstone. The first order of business was to translate them. The 8 runes were transliterated into the Latin alphabet as Junoemidl. Simple enough. But what did it mean? 2 primary interpretations immediately came to the forefront. The first, and by far the most sensational, was Gunomdal. Dal is an Old Norse word for valley. So, Valley of the Gnomes. To the public, this sounded mystical, adventurous, straight out of a Tolkien novel. To scholars, it sounded an alarm bell so loud it was deafening. While Norse mythology is filled with dwarves, elves, and giants, the specific concept of the gnome, the little bearded man with the pointy hat living in the earth, is largely a later creation of European folklore, popularized hundreds of years after the Viking Age. A Viking in the 11th century carving Valley of the Gnomes would be like a Roman legionary carving Valley of the Gremlins. It's an anachronism, a cultural fingerprint from the wrong era. The second, more sober translation was Glomdal. This theory proposed that the first rune was not a G, but a combination of G and L, and that the name was not Gnome, but Glome. Glome's Valley. This was far more plausible. Glome could have been a personal name. The inscription could be a simple land claim, a marker left by an explorer named Glome who claimed the valley for himself. This felt more authentic, more in line with the practical nature of many runic inscriptions. But it also presented its own problem. Who was Glome? No historical record, no saga. No piece of lore mentioned a Viking explorer named Glome who ventured deep into the American continent. It was a name without a story, a ghost in the machine. But the debate over the meaning of the words was just the opening act. The real problem, the one that made most academics dismiss the stone out of hand, was the runes themselves. The alphabet. You see, the runic alphabet wasn't static. It evolved over time just like our own. The letters used by Shakespeare are different from the ones we text with today. The Vikings had an early alphabet called the Elder Futhark, used roughly from the 2nd to the 8th centuries. Then, as the Viking Age dawned, it was simplified into the Younger Futhark, which was used from the 8th to the 12th centuries. The Heavener inscription was a chaotic jumble of both. Some of its runes were clearly from the ancient Elder Futhark, which would have been archaic and out of use for hundreds of years by the time a Viking might have reached Oklahoma. Other runes were from the Younger Futhark, the contemporary alphabet of the Viking Age. And 1 or 2 seemed to be hybrids, not quite fitting into either system perfectly. To a runologist, this was the equivalent of finding a message that read, "Thou art totally awesome, LOL." It was a linguistic Frankenstein, stitched together from parts that didn't belong in the same body, let alone the same sentence. The conclusion for most experts was swift and brutal. This was not the work of a Viking. It was the work of a modern hoaxer, someone with a rudimentary book-learned knowledge of runes who picked characters they liked from different charts without understanding they came from different time periods. It was the calling card of an amateur. One of the most prominent skeptics was Dr. Eric Walgren, a professor at UCLA and a leading authority on the subject. He had spent his career debunking fraudulent Viking claims, most notably the Kensington Runestone. When he turned his attention to Heavener, he was merciless. He pointed to the jumbled alphabet, the unlikely Gnome Valley translation, and the complete lack of any archaeological context. There were no Viking graves, no longhouse foundations, no fire pits, no discarded tools. There was only this one solitary stone. For Walgren and the majority of the academic world, the case was closed. The Heavener Runestone was a modern carving, a product of local fantasy or an outright prank. It was another ghost, another echo of the Kensington hoax. And for decades, that's where the story stalled. The stone was a local curiosity, a tourist attraction, but in the serious halls of academia, it was a footnote at best, a joke at worst. Gloria Farley continued her crusade, but she was shouting into the wind. The experts had spoken, but then the amateurs fought back. And they came armed with a radical new theory. Leading the charge was a man named Richard Nielsen, an engineer with a passion for runology. Nielsen wasn't a professor with tenure. He was an outsider, and precisely because he was an outsider, he was willing to look at the stone in a way no one else had. He agreed with the experts on one thing: the runes were strange. They didn't fit the standard model. But his conclusion was completely different. He didn't think the carver was an ignorant hoaxer. He thought the carver was a genius. Nielsen argued that the inscription wasn't a mistake, it was a puzzle. He proposed that the mixed runes weren't a jumble, but a deliberate coded script. He pointed to medieval Scandinavian manuscripts where scribes sometimes used older, archaic rune forms for stylistic or cryptographic purposes. Maybe, he argued, the Heavener carver was doing the same thing. And then he focused on the two most controversial runes on the entire stone, the 6th and 8th characters. The mainstream interpretation read them as D and L, but Nielsen saw something else. He believed the 6th rune, which looks a bit like a capital M, was not a D at all, but a special symbol representing a specific date. And the final rune, the L, he argued was actually a number. This is where the theory takes a spectacular leap. According to Nielsen and his fellow researchers, the inscription wasn't just Glom's Valley. It was a date, a very, very specific date. By reinterpreting these runes as part of a cryptic medieval calendar system, they arrived at a stunning conclusion. The stone, they claimed, was carved on November 11, 1012. Think about that. November 11, 1012, nearly 500 years before Columbus. A group of Vikings deep in the heart of North America, in what would one day become Oklahoma, marking a specific day. The claim was breathtaking. It gave the stone a new, profound sense of reality. It wasn't just a vague marker anymore. It was a timestamp, a single moment of history frozen in rock. This new interpretation electrified the stone's supporters. It explained the weird runes not as a mistake but as a deliberate code. It provided a concrete date that placed the stone squarely in the middle of the Viking Age, right around the time Leif Erikson was exploring the coasts of Newfoundland. It transformed the stone from a likely fraud into a potential Rosetta Stone for Vikings in America. But for the academic establishment, this was the final straw. It was a theory built on a theory, a stack of conjectures that grew more and more incredible with each step. The idea of a Viking using a complex calendrical code to write a date on a rock in a format that wouldn't be standardized for centuries, in the middle of an uncharted wilderness, struck them as utterly absurd. It was too neat, too perfect. It felt less like a discovery and more like a desperate attempt to make the evidence fit a romantic narrative. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, the professional academics, armed with established linguistic rules and a deep skepticism born from decades of debunked hoaxes. On the other, a passionate group of amateur researchers, armed with a radical new code-breaking theory that, if true, would rewrite American history. The stone was no longer just a curiosity. It was the heart of a bitter intellectual war. A war over who gets to write our history and what constitutes proof. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, the established academic world, the guardians of history, armed with decades of linguistic and archaeological orthodoxy. Their verdict was in, and it was damning. The Heavener Runestone was at best a tragic misunderstanding, and at worst an outright fraud. To them, the inscription was a jumble, a mess. It was like finding a car from the 1920s with a GPS screen on the dashboard and a USB port next to the hand crank. The runes themselves were a chaotic mix, plucked from different time periods spanning hundreds of years. Some belonged to the Elder Futhark, the earliest runic alphabet, while others were from the younger Futhark, which came much later. The grammar, if you could even call it that, was nonsensical. It didn't follow the rules of Old Norse. And most damning of all, there was the complete lack of archaeological context. No longhouse remains, no Viking-era axe heads, no burial mounds. Nothing. Just a solitary inscribed rock in the middle of Oklahoma. For mainstream runologists and historians, the case was closed. It was modern. A prank? A fantasy, or perhaps the work of a Scandinavian immigrant in the 19th century. Someone with a romantic but clumsy knowledge of their ancestral alphabet. But on the other side of this intellectual war stood a man who saw something entirely different. He wasn't a university professor or a tenured historian. He was a man who dealt not in ancient languages, but in modern secrets. His name was Alf Monge, and he was a cryptanalyst for the United States Army. During World War II, Monge's job was to stare at meaningless strings of numbers and letters sent by the enemy until they gave up their secrets. He was a professional pattern finder, a man trained to believe that no message is ever truly random. When he turned his formidable mind to the strange inscriptions being found across America, Heavener, Kensington, Spirit Pond, he didn't see a clumsy hoax. He saw a system, a hidden layer of complexity that everyone else had missed. Monge's central idea was revolutionary, and to the academic establishment it was pure heresy. He argued that these runestones were not simple messages at all. They weren't meant to be read as "Leaf was here" or "Eric built this." He proposed they were something far more sophisticated, cryptographic puzzles. Specifically, he believed they were runic calendars, designed to secretly embed a specific date within the inscription itself. He called them cryptopuzzles or riddle runes. According to Monge, the Vikings, or whoever carved these stones, were deliberately mixing rune types and breaking grammatical rules. It wasn't a mistake, it was the key. It was part of the code. He believed the carvers used a complex system where certain runes could stand for numbers, and their position in the inscription corresponded to complex medieval calendars and astronomical charts. Let's break down what he saw in the Heavener stone. The inscription, as you'll recall, is typically read as Jamdel. 6 of those runes come from the older alphabet, but 2 of them, the second and the last, come from the later, younger one. For academics, this was proof of a hoax. For Monge, it was a flashing light, a signal from the past. He believed these 2 out-of-place runes were the key to the puzzle. He assigned numerical values to the runes based on their order in the Futhark alphabet, a practice that has some historical precedent. Then, through a series of complex calculations involving the position of the runes in medieval Christian calendar systems, he began to decode what he saw as a hidden date. He wasn't reading the letters, he was calculating them. Imagine you're looking at a clock. You don't read the numbers 12, 3, 6, and 9 is the number 1236. You understand their position tells you the time. Monge argued the Heavener inscription worked the same way. The runes themselves and their specific placement were pointers. The first rune, he claimed, represented a number on a perpetual calendar. The second, out-of-place rune, told you which specific calendar cycle to use. The other runes continued the calculation, narrowing it down further and further. It was a multi-step verification system, a 1,000-year-old CAPTCHA test carved in stone. After running the inscription through his cryptographic models, Monge arrived at a stunningly precise conclusion. The Heavener Runestone wasn't just a general marker. It was a date stamp. The date it commemorated, he declared, was November 11, 1012. Let that sink in. Not around the 11th century. Not sometime in the 1000s. November 11, 1012. This was a level of specificity that was both breathtaking and, to his critics, utterly unbelievable. To add another layer of tantalizing detail, November 11th is St. Martin's Day, a significant festival in medieval Europe. The date wasn't random. It was culturally significant. Monge argued this was the aha moment, the final piece of the puzzle that confirmed his theory. The carvers had created an ingenious riddle to mark a specific, important day. And Monge didn't stop at Heavener. He applied his cryptographic system to the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, another fiercely debated artifact. He claimed to decode a date from its inscription as well, April 24, 1362. He looked at other stones and found other dates. To Monge, this was it. He had found the Rosetta Stone for pre-Columbian Norse exploration. It wasn't a single isolated puzzle. It was a widespread cryptographic practice, a secret language of dates hidden in plain sight, scattered across the American continent. He believed he had single-handedly solved the greatest mystery in American archaeology. He had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Norsemen were not only here long before Columbus, but that they were here in Oklahoma, in Minnesota, in New England, and they were leaving behind sophisticated, dated messages. The reaction from the academic world was, to put it mildly, explosive. They were not impressed. In fact, many were appalled. They accused Monge of inventing a system of breathtaking complexity, and then projecting it onto the stones. It was, they argued, a textbook case of confirmation bias. He had started with the conclusion that the stones were authentic, and then tortured the data until it confessed. Runologists pointed out that there was zero evidence from the entire Viking world in Europe of this kind of complex cryptographic datekeeping. The Vikings were poets and sagas writers, not Byzantine cryptographers. They carved straightforward, often boastful messages. Halfdan carved these runes. Simple, direct. Manja's system, with its reliance on obscure medieval calendars and multi-step numerical conversions, seemed more like something out of a modern spy novel than the Viking Age. The criticism was harsh. Experts called his methods fanciful, absurd, and devoid of logic. They argued that if you create a system complex enough with enough variables, you can find any date you want in any random string of letters. You could use Manja's method on a license plate and probably find the date of the Battle of Hastings. The intellectual war had its new battlefield. It was no longer about just the shape of the runes or the lack of Viking artifacts. It was now a high-stakes debate over cryptography. Was Alf Manja genius who had uncovered a secret language hidden for a millennium? Or was he a brilliant but misguided man, seeing an intricate, beautiful code where there was only, and had only ever been, a meaningless jumble of lines on a rock? The answer would depend on who you believed: the keepers of ancient languages, or the master of modern codes. Alf Manja was a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos. A Norwegian-born American, he hadn't spent his life in dusty university archives studying ancient texts. He was a cryptanalyst. He'd spent decades working for the U.S. Army, breaking the complex secret codes of foreign governments. To him, a string of seemingly random letters or symbols wasn't gibberish. It was a locked door, and he was a master locksmith. When he looked at the Heavener Stone, and others like it across America, he didn't see a clumsy, misspelled message. He saw a challenge. He saw a puzzle deliberately crafted by a mind just as clever as his own, only 1,000 years older. His central idea was revolutionary, and to its supporters breathtakingly elegant. He argued that the Vikings weren't just leaving messages, they were leaving time capsules. He believed the inscriptions weren't meant to be read as words, but as a cryptopuzzle or a runic calendar. The entire purpose of the inscription was to secretly embed a specific date. Why do this? Perhaps it was a game among the literate elite of a Viking expedition. Perhaps it was a way to create a memorial that was both permanent and esoteric, a secret handshake across the centuries. Or perhaps it was a way to prove unequivocally when they were there. A simple message could be faked. A complex mathematical puzzle, woven into the very fabric of the runic system, would be nearly impossible to forge. According to Manja, the key was understanding that runes weren't just letters. They had names, they had sounds, but they also had a fixed order in the alphabet, the futhark. And because they had a fixed order, they had a numerical position. The first rune Fehu is 1. The second Urus is 2, and so on. He also drew on an ancient Norse numbering system known as the pentathic system, which used a base 5 count. By combining the numerical position of certain runes on the stone with the rules of the pentathic system and the complexities of the Old Norse calendar, Manja believed he could unlock the hidden date. He looked at the Heavener inscription, L. To the runologists, it was nonsense. To Manja, it was a set of variables in a complex equation. He identified specific runes in the inscription that he believed were the key numbers. For the Heavener stone, he focused on 4 runes: the first N, the M, the E, and the L. He assigned them numerical values based on their position in the futhark. Then, through a series of calculations involving the Norse calendar's so-called golden number and dominical letter, concepts used to determine the date of Easter and the day of the week, he began to work his magic. It was a dizzying process, a matrix of ancient astronomy, forgotten calendars, and runic numerology. But when the dust settled, Alf Manja announced he had found the answer. He declared that the Heavener Runestone was a cryptographic marker for a very specific day, November 11, 1012. The impact was seismic. It wasn't just a vague around the year 1000 anymore. It was a precise day, month, and year. This single discovery seemed to explain everything. It explained why the grammar was non-existent, because it wasn't supposed to be a sentence. It explained the odd mix of rune shapes, because the carver was choosing runes for their numerical value, not their linguistic one. Gloria Farley and her supporters were ecstatic. This was the proof they had been searching for. A world-class codebreaker using objective mathematics had verified their beliefs. The stone wasn't just a local curiosity. It was a 1,000-year-old Norse super puzzle. Manja didn't stop there. He applied his method to the other Oklahoma stones and most famously, to the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota. Time and again, He produced precise dates from the 11th and 14th centuries. It seemed he had discovered a unified field theory for American runestones. For a brief, shining moment it looked like the case was closed. But then, the keepers of the ancient languages began to respond. From the universities of Oslo, Copenhagen, and Uppsala, the world's leading runologists looked at Alf Monge's work, and they were not impressed. In fact, they were horrified. Their critique wasn't just a disagreement. It was a systematic dismantling of his entire theory piece by piece. First, they attacked the very foundation of his method, the data he was using. Monge treated the runic alphabet as a single static codebook. But the runologists knew this was false. The Futhark was a living script that evolved dramatically over centuries. Monge was picking and choosing runes from the elder Futhark, which was largely out of use by the Viking Age, and mixing them with runes from the younger Futhark, which was the common script of the time. It was the equivalent of writing a modern English sentence where the letter is from Shakespeare's time, the B is from Chaucer's, and the C is from a text message. It makes no historical sense. A carver in 1012 would have used the script he knew, not a grab bag of symbols from 500 years of runic history. Second, they pointed out that the complex calendrical and mathematical systems Monge used were themselves anachronistic. While the Norse had a calendar, the specific intricate system Monge claimed they used to hide the date simply didn't exist in the 11th century in that form. He was projecting later, more developed medieval Christian calendar science back onto early Viking explorers. But the most damning criticism was also the simplest. The Norwegian runologist Aslak Listel put it bluntly: Monge's system was so complex, so flexible, and had so many variables, that you could use it to find a date in almost any random sequence of symbols. You could change which runes were the key numbers. You could interpret the numbers in different ways. You could tweak the calendrical calculations. It was, the academics argued, a masterful exercise in confirmation bias. Monge, the brilliant codebreaker, was so convinced he was looking at a code that he built an elaborate machine to solve it, failing to realize the machine was designed in such a way that it would always produce the result he wanted. It was like seeing a rabbit in the clouds. If you stare long enough and are allowed to ignore the bits that don't fit, you'll eventually see the rabbit. But that doesn't mean the sky is trying to send you a message. Then came the final crushing blow, and it came from the Kensington runestone. Kensington is, by overwhelming scholarly consensus, a 19th century hoax created by a Swedish-American farmer. Yet, when Monge applied his cryptopuzzle method to the Kensington stone, he triumphantly extracted a precise date: April 24, 1362. For Monge and his supporters, this proved Kensington was also authentic. But for the academic world, it did the exact opposite. Proved his method was fundamentally broken. If your secret decoder ring can take a known fake and declare it to be an authentic ancient artifact, then the problem isn't with the artifact, it's with your decoder ring. By validating the most famous runic hoax in America, Monge had inadvertently invalidated his entire life's work on the subject. The dream was over. The beautiful, intricate code was revealed to be a phantom, a product of a brilliant but misguided modern mind, not an ancient one. The academic world turned away, the case now doubly closed. The stone was not a Viking message, and it was certainly not a Viking puzzle. With Monge's theory discredited, the Heavener Runestone was once again an outcast, stripped of its date, its purpose, and its story. It was back to being a meaningless jumble of lines on a rock. And for years that's where it stayed, a silent monument to a dead controversy. But the stone had one more secret to give up. Because as the debate between runologists and cryptographers faded, a new and unsettling question began to be asked. What if everyone had been wrong from the very beginning? What if the carver wasn't an ancient Viking or a brilliant puzzle maker, but someone far more recent and far more familiar? The idea was a quiet heresy at first, whispered in academic halls far from the Oklahoma hills. It was an explanation that felt, to many, like a betrayal of the grand adventure. The theory suggested that the runes weren't a cryptic message from a lost Viking expedition, nor an elaborate puzzle from a medieval cleric. They were something much simpler. A product of the 19th century. Think about the timeline. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the land that would become Oklahoma was a frontier, a place of immense change. By the mid to late 1800s, waves of European immigrants were spreading across America, driven by dreams of land and opportunity. Among them were thousands of Swedes, Norwegians, and Danes, people who grew up with stories of the Vikings, with the runes as part of their cultural heritage. In the late 19th century, there was a massive revival of interest in Viking history across Scandinavia, a movement known as National Romanticism. Sagas were being republished, ancient history was celebrated, and the runes became a powerful symbol of a glorious past. So, imagine a young Swedish immigrant maybe working on the railroads being built nearby, or having set up a small farmstead. He finds himself in this strange, beautiful, but alien landscape of Poteau Mountain. He's lonely, perhaps, and nostalgic for the home he left behind. He knows the old letters, the Futhark, not as a professional runemaster, but in the way many of us know a bit of Shakespeare or can recognize a few Latin phrases. It's part of his cultural DNA. And so, in a moment of inspiration or boredom, or a desire to leave a mark, he finds a great stone slab and carves. He isn't trying to fool future generations. He's just writing, leaving a piece of himself in this new world. This theory, the modern carver theory, began to gain traction because it solved so many problems. It explained the lack of any other Viking artifacts. No longhouse foundations, no rusted axe heads, no burial mounds. A single stone is not an occupation. It also explained the pristine condition of the carving. 1,000 years of Oklahoma weather, of freezing winters, scorching summers, and torrential rain, would have eroded the inscription far more severely. But 150 years? That was much more plausible. And most importantly, it explained the runes themselves. Remember how Alf Monge's complex cryptographic solution required him to twist and turn the runes, to see them as numbers and symbols in a complex code? The modern carver theory offered a much simpler explanation. Monge was a genius, but perhaps he was a genius who had found the wrong problem to solve. He was so convinced it was a cryptogram that he made the evidence fit his theory. The real breakthrough came from a new generation of runologists, scholars with access to vast databases and a modern understanding of linguistics. Chief among them is the world's leading authority on the subject, Professor Henrik Williams from Uppsala University in Sweden. When Williams examined the Heavener inscription, he didn't see a complex date. He saw a series of mistakes. Not the mistakes of a medieval Viking, but the mistakes of a modern person with a romantic but incomplete knowledge of the runes. The inscription on the Heavener stone is a jumble. Some of the runes are from the Elder Futhark, the earliest runic alphabet used from the 2nd to the 8th centuries. Others are from the younger Futhark, which was used during the Viking Age proper. A Viking in the year 1012 would never have mixed them this way. It would be like you or I writing a sentence where half the letters are in a modern font, and the other half are in Old English manuscript lettering from the year 900. It's an anachronism. It's something only a person looking back from the distant future, seeing all these historical scripts as one big old-timey alphabet, would do. Professor Williams's analysis was the final, devastating blow to the Viking theory. He concluded with near certainty that the inscription was carved sometime in the 19th or possibly early 20th century. The name it spells out, whether it's Genomidel or Gelamidel, might not be a name at all. It could be a nostalgic attempt to write Gloam's Valley or Gnomesdale, perhaps a nickname for the beautiful valley below, or a memory of a place back in the old country. So where does that leave us? Is the story of the Heavener Runestone a fraud? A hoax? Is it meaningless? No, not at all. In fact, it might be even more meaningful. The stone is not a testament to a forgotten Viking expedition. It is a testament to something far more universal: the power of a story. For decades, the story of Vikings in Oklahoma captured the imagination of a nation. It spoke to a desire for a deeper, more epic history on American soil, a secret timeline hidden just beneath the surface. It's the same impulse that fuels our fascination with lost cities and ancient mysteries. We want to believe that our world is more magical than it seems. And at the heart of that belief was Gloria Farley. Was she wrong? By the standards of modern archaeology and linguistics, yes. But her life's work was not a failure. Without her relentless, stubborn, passionate crusade, that stone would not be standing in a state park today. It would have been dynamited into rubble for a highway quarry. It would be gone forever. She saw something special in that rock, and her belief gave it a power that saved it. She transformed a local curiosity into a legend. She dedicated her life to preserving a mystery, and in doing so she preserved a genuine piece of history. Just not the history she thought it was. The Heavener Runestone is no longer a serious candidate for a pre-Columbian Viking artifact. The scientific consensus is clear. but it has become something else. It is an icon of American folklore. It's a monument to the Scandinavian immigrants who helped build this country, and who may have left a lonely, nostalgic message on a mountainside. It's a cautionary tale about how easily we can be led astray by our desire to believe. And most of all, it is the legacy of Gloria Farley, a woman who looked at a carved rock and saw a saga, and who fought for decades to make the rest of the world see it too. The mystery hasn't vanished. It has simply changed. The question is no longer, did Vikings land in Oklahoma 1,000 years ago? The question now is, who was the modern man who stood on this mountain, hammer and chisel in hand, and carved these ancient symbols so far from their ancestral home? What was he thinking? What was he feeling? Was he a prankster? A poet? A lonely soul longing for the fjords? That is a mystery we may never solve. And perhaps that's for the best. Because the Heavener Runestone's true power isn't in the answers it provides, but in the questions it forces us to ask about history, about evidence, and about the incredible, enduring human need to leave a mark and tell a story.